Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and once again, it's been ages since I last filmed, but actually I think almost exactly 1 month, because I think the last time I batch filmed, it was when I did my October wrap-up. And today we are here with my November wrap-up, so let's get into it, let's get into the stats. I'm just not doing so great currently, not gonna lie, so yeah, that's why you're hardly seeing any videos from me. But let's get into the Storygraph stats for November. I read 5 books in November and a total of about 2,500 pages, about a third of which aren't even part of any of the books that I finished this month, because I'm still working my way through Rhythm of War. Anyway, the moods were tense, emotional, dark, challenging, adventurous, reflective, mysterious, and informative. Pacing, 20% were slow-paced, 20% were fast-paced, and 60% were medium-paced books. Page numbers, 40% of the books that I finished in November were over 500 pages, 20 were between 300 and 500 pages, and 40 were under 300 pages. I only read fiction once again. Genres were fantasy, LGBTQIA, short stories, romance, and horror. I had a hiccup, I'm sorry. Then I read 60% in print, so 3 in print, 2 digitally. And then my star ratings were, I had 1 3.25 star, 1 3.75 star, 2 4.25 stars, and 1 5 star, which makes an average rating of 4.1. So actually I had quite a good time this month. And then in terms of my inclusivity stats, I actually need to look up which the digital books were, because I cannot remember. Okay, that's weird. I have one digitally here that I didn't read digitally, and then one as physical that I didn't read physically. Anyway, so it ends up all right anyway. So yeah, in terms of queerness, I had 2 books that were written by / featured queer main characters. I had 2 books by BIPOC authors. And then in terms of mental health and disability stats, I once again, my brain can't do it. It's like, I think maybe it's gonna be a goal of mine next year. I mean, we know that generally speaking, disability and mental health isn't that well represented, especially in fantasy, or can be harder to like gauge where it is, if it's included somewhere, because obviously it's not as explicit a lot of times. But yeah, let's get through the books, or through talking about the books that I read this month. And first, I had a book that is actually the first finished copy by a traditional publisher. That's not a self-pub book that I was sent, which was interesting. And like, this is outside of what I usually read, like far outside of what I usually read, but I said yes to this specifically because, funnily enough, all my biggest surprises so far this year, so books that I didn't expect to love as much as I did, ended up being romantic fantasy. And so I've been meaning to dip my toes into romantasy, although with this book I'm like, you know, I might enjoy it every now and again, or there might be outliers, but I don't think this is gonna become a genre that I will regularly pick up anyway. So yeah, anyway, the book that I read and that I got was The Serpent and the Wolf by Rebecca Robinson. I hadn't heard of this, but then again, I'm not on the side of TikTok where romantasy is talked about a lot. And this is quite a standard plot. It's a fake marriage trope. So you have your main character Vasa, who after the death of her mom discovers that she has those kind of like weird powers, and who is the sister of the now king of this country. She's also forced to marry this guy from this other country to like make an alliance or whatever. And the other guy needs this alliance to become the leader, the ruler of his country. Something along those lines. However, Vasa discovers that while at first she thought that marrying him might not be such a good idea because it kind of puts her on her brother's shit list for reasons, that her new husband can help her, or knows people who can help her with her newfound magic powers, and then the two fall in love. It's like a pretty standard story. I like had a good enough time with it. I gave it 3.25 stars. However, I have a kind of hard time talking about this book or recommending it or not recommending it, because a lot of the problems that I had with this book, where it felt very, you know, tropey and standard and like nothing really outside of the box, I don't know if that's just because of the genre and because I'm not a fan of romantic fantasy as a whole, because I would put this in romantasy rather than romantic fantasy, because without the romance the plot can't happen. Basically, like the romance is the main plot. So I don't know if it's just that, you know, that I just generally don't enjoy those types of books as much, or if I have to be in a very specific mood. However, I did still somewhat enjoy it. It was like right at a moment where I was like, I need something like really easy and fast and like no thinking to read. And this was that, to be honest. Like, there wasn't that much world building. There was some things where I wasn't quite sure, like the country where the husband is from is like in the south, and it's hot there and it's desert, and it felt a little bit like the, you know, racially ambiguous love interest type thing that I've heard a lot of criticism about already about the romantasy genre. So yeah, that was definitely a thing here. However, I finally found the relationship between the main character and her first female best friend way more engaging. But yeah, it was fun enough. If you enjoy romantasy, maybe give it a try. I really can't say enough about this book because, as I said, not really familiar with the genre and the genre conventions. The next book is my 3.75 stars, and that is Your Madness Not Mine, Stories of Cameroon by Makuchi, who, by the way, was the first woman in Cameroon to have, I think, 2 PhDs or something. Like, I read through her biography and it's like really impressive. This was one of the books that I read for my Read Around the World. Originally, Cameroon was my October book or September book. I think October book. And luckily I had access to this one specifically. I mean, it was on a lot of recommended lists, but I had access to this book specifically through my university library, so that's why I ended up picking it. And this is a short story collection centering in a lot of the short stories the women. However, what I found particularly interesting, and that's something that's already explained in the preface, is that Cameroon in terms of colonial history has this very specific history also, because Cameroon was under colonial rule of multiple different colonial powers, mainly France and England, however also I believe Germany. But the two main colonial languages still existing now in Cameroon are French and English, and between these two languages, French is seen as the like better language. However, Makuchi is like Anglophone, and she also went to an Anglophone university, so she the colonial language that she mainly speaks is English. And this short story collection deals with this like dichotomy and this conflict between French and English, but also the you know, local and pre-colonial languages, as well as the different, I never know if it's Pidgin or Pitkin, versions of the languages a lot, and actually a lot of the dialogue, which made it kind of hard sometimes to fully get what's going on. A lot of the dialogue is not in English, so it's either in French, or it's in a type of Pitkin French, or in a type of Pitkin English, or in some of the other languages that also exist in the different peoples of Cameroon. And so language is a very, very big part, and colonial legacy also is a very big part of this short story collection. And yeah, I just overall really enjoyed it, even though, as I said, I didn't understand everything necessarily. But I just really enjoyed it, so I can highly recommend this short story collection. Then for my 2 4.25 star books, first I have Metal from Heaven by August Clark. They are a debut author, I believe, and this one I had an arc for. This one I did not quite finish the book by the time the book came out though, and it's a kind of, I've seen it shelved as sci-fi, I've seen it shelved as fantasy. I would put it into this kind of like almost beginning of 19th century steampunk vibes, except it's not really steam, it's more already like fuel and gas and guns, etc. And there's like something very sci-fi about it because there's not a lot of fantasy. However, there is a lot of technology, but then the main like central plot of the story revolves around our main character who has a type of magical power. And so it's like this very, very interesting story. It's a book that gets compared a lot to Gideon the Ninth, and I do see where the comparisons come from, because I can't say if it's like the writing or if it's the way that the plot jumps and often like doesn't explain a lot. But something about it felt very reminiscent to me to Gideon the Ninth. However, where I couldn't quite connect with Gideon the Ninth, I really was able to connect with this story. And so we follow our main character Marnie, and at the very beginning of the story, Marnie is part of a massacre, and she's a part of a massacre of workers who mine this mineral called Itcherite. And you have a few children of these workers who have developed a sensitivity to Itcherite in a way where they can manipulate it. And Marnie is one of such people. She is also the only survivor of this massacre, and she ends up with this band of mostly female kind of thieves, bandits, that type of deal. And she vows revenge against like the main villain of the story, basically, who's like this who created his wealth and his power from the Itcherite mines because he owns them. And I really enjoyed it. I really loved the writing style. I really loved the ending. It's one of those stories also, once again, where I read through a bunch of the negative reviews, where I just, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I see it, I understand why, and some of them I'm like, weirdo. Like, there was one negative review that complained about this being a colonizer romance, and like there is an instance where Marnie romances a noble. However, anyway, read the book if you want to know why I'm laughing at that a little bit. But I really enjoyed mainly the writing. I enjoyed Marnie as a character also. I found her very, very interesting. I really enjoyed the world building, what there was of it. It was like less so a full picture. It was the type of world building where I think you might be frustrated if you want to know every single thing, but at the same time it feels very lived in because of how little detail we get, and we only get the relevant bits, or the bits that are relevant to our main characters. I really enjoyed like the concept of the story. It's kind of hard to say because there's like Marnie every now and again, it's written in first person. However, Marnie every now and again talks to her childhood love, or narrates to her childhood love, which she always narrates in like second person. So that's also very interesting. And yeah, it's just, I think it's a book that's hard to recommend because I think it's a book that you either really get along with or really enjoy, or that you just absolutely can. So I would say, if it sounds interesting to you, Like, find a way to read maybe the first few chapters, see how you like it, and then decide whether the book is for you or not. My other 4.25 star book is Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. I won't talk about this too long. It's a very short story. It's like just under 200 pages, I think. And this is horror. I originally thought it was some kind of paranormal horror, however, it is not. And I won't tell you that much. It's about our main character, Rosemary, who moves to this new little town and meets a girl there called Ash. And she is absolutely smitten instantly with Ash and gets along great with her, starts to get to know more and more about her, and is often kind of put off by the fact that Ash seems to be a very private person. And I'll leave it at that already. So it's sapphic. It's the inspiration for this. The author said was the TV show Hannibal. So there, if you're not a fan of cannibalism, this is cannibalist horror. I also, once again, I really enjoyed the writing in this. It wasn't the type of writing where I'm like, this is my personal favorite type of writing. However, it's something that I really appreciate, and that is that I read the first page and instantly recognized that the author has a very distinct voice, which, again, I just appreciate that. And it was just a very short, quick read. I enjoyed the ending. I don't want to talk too much about it because, again, it's kind of a short book. And then the last book, I will try to keep short once again because I do want to film a full review of this. I finally finished Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang. This was so good. Once again, it was one of those books where I was like, I loved Sword of Kaigen so much that I was scared to start this. Everyone I know who read this hyped it up so much to me that I was like, what if I don't like it? Like, I can't not like it, but what if I don't? And in the end, I absolutely loved it. I adored it. It's I can't describe it in the way that I usually described it because it would kind of be a spoiler for Babel. But it's if a very specific character from Babel was the main character, but also able to learn from talking to others. Anyway, we follow in this story Skiona. And Skiona is supposed to be the first, or she ends up being in the very first chapters, the first female high mage within the city ever that runs, like, the city is very technologically advanced. It runs on magic, basically. And Skiona already had to go through a lot. She's also not necessarily from a privileged background, so she's a working class background. She has always had scholarships, and she has made it. She's the first female high mage ever, and she starts work and she realizes all her colleagues are still gonna be sexist assholes and are gonna make fun of her, are not gonna take her seriously, etc. And on her first day, they allow themselves a choke, quote unquote, because every high mage gets like lab assistants, which are usually students from the university where everyone learns about, you know, magic. However, they are like, you know what, who would fit well with the high mage? The immigrant janitor. And so she gets Tomil as an assistant, and Tomil, as I just mentioned, is not just an immigrant, but he is part of a nomadic indigenous community. Because surrounding the city, there used to, for the longest time, live nomadic groups called the Quen. However, something has been slowly killing them called the Blight. And basically on this plateau, the only place that is safe from the Blight is our main city, our main setting. And so Tomil, years and years ago, came with his entire tribe to try and get into the city. However, only he and his sister's daughter made it. And so now he has to help this high mage who has no idea about the plight of the Quen and like about everything, who is kind of as prejudiced about them as a lot of other people, and there's a lot of very frustrating scenes between Skiona and Tomil, where Skiona is kind of like, you know, you're different and you're smarter, and like, we're known. However, the two of them get to know each other better, and they get behind, or they try to get behind, some of the greatest secrets of the creation of magic, and like things go from there. This is basically dark academia, however very intersectional dark academia. So there's not just talk about minorities in academia, there's also talks about, you know, bigger class struggles and who has privilege and who has privilege when, and like who gets to be prejudiced, who is hurt when things happen, when, you know, you try to change a situation, etc. And there's just a lot going on that I absolutely loved. I loved Skiona as a main character. She is so insanely frustrating as a main character, but at the same time you do see her grow, which is why it's interesting to follow her. If she didn't want to grow at all, it would be like a different thing. I wouldn't follow this book for 500 pages. And once again, while it didn't make me sob through the last 200 pages like Sword of Kaigen did, this one once again also did make me cry by the end. So I don't know what I expected from ML Wang, but yeah, absolutely adored this, absolutely loved it, can highly recommend. And with all of that, that was it for my November wrap up. If you have read any of the books that I talked about and have thoughts on them, leave them down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left down below as well. In December we're reading, no, we're not reading The City in Glass. I can't get the book right now, it's up there. We read The Coal Gets in Your Veins by Kat Rector, which I read back in August, I believe. No, September. So, yeah. Anyway, I have a review of it if it sounds interesting to you. And with all of that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye.